Ah, well met, adventurer. Volo here. Please come closer. Take a seat. I'd like to tell you about a monster that lurks deep in the recesses of darkness and might as well be straight from your nightmares. But first, let's let the creature speak for itself, shall we? Imagine you're trapped in the Underdark, unable to see more than 20 feet in any direction. Just the light spell cast on a broken lantern to guide your way. The flicker on the cavern walls dances when you hear a distant murmur. As you attempt to make sense of its meaning, you realize that there is none, just a hum of unsettling noise. With the path behind you collapsed in on itself, you move forward with no choice but to advance, hypnotized as the sounds grow louder. Spooky, isn't it? You, my friend, just had the pleasure, or perhaps displeasure, of listening to the telltale sound of a gibbering mouther. This monster, no doubt created by some sort of foul sorcery, is among one of the most depraved creatures an adventurer can encounter on one's journey. Awaiting its prey in isolation, hiding in the darkness of ancient places, these creatures can spell doom for parties lacking the insight on how best to avoid them. Fortunately for you, I will share this knowledge and impart upon you the lessons learned from my experience with this monster. A compilation of the eyes, mouths, and liquefied matter of its former victims, the gibbering mouther is a grotesque aberration with a compulsion to consume anything within reach. Its body is an amorphous mass that oozes forward along the ground, propelled by its many teeth that adhere to the surface. And don't start to think of escaping a gibbering mouther over water, as it is just as capable of slithering forth. Although moving at only a third of the pace of an average human, it is tireless and unrelenting. The hallmark of these monsters is, of course, its namesake. When one of the many eyes of the gibbering mouther detects the presence of prey, through the darkness, the mouths of the absorbed victims let loose a chorus of incoherent noises that is often described as an incessant gibbering madness. Each mouth murmurs and chatters in a different voice, guttural or shrill, wailing or booming, some crying out in ecstasy, others agony. Once within range, the mental fortitude of those exposed to the sound will be tested. Anyone not resilient enough to maintain resistance will be overcome, unable to react, their senses totally overwhelmed. Many will stand motionless, paralyzed with madness. Some will flee in terror. Others may respond violently, attacking mindlessly at the closest creature, regardless of the target, friend or foe. I once found myself inches away from becoming a gibbering mouther's supper. I was on an expedition through the Underdark in an effort to compile research on some of its less studied inhabitants. I was in the company of a certain well-known wizard who had his own business in this god-forsaken landscape. We had acquired the service of a few experienced adventurers who were interested in the fabled treasures abandoned in the far-off locales that I expected to be visiting. We paid quite handsomely, if I do say so myself. All parties were fully aware of the dangers this place presented. We had been in the near darkness for 2, perhaps 3 weeks at this point, and were just setting up camp for the night when I heard a strange noise far off in the distance. Of course, being the inquisitive type, I had to investigate. That said, I am no fool, and with me I brought one of the adventurers. A rather tall, stocky chap with an axe as large as a grown man and a beard that could rival a dwarf's. We proceeded down a narrow corridor, listening as the noise grew louder. The tunnel opened up to a large chamber, slightly illuminated by the faint glow of the local fluorescent fungi hanging from the walls. It was at this point that we were able to spot the source of all of the sound as it resonated throughout the cavity. There, towards the middle of the space, we spotted a gibbering mouther. And of course, it all made sense instantly. This was one of the last creatures on my list that I needed to study, and after some silent debate with my partner, I proceeded with caution. The creature seemed to be devouring something that at this point was now unidentifiable. I was sure that I was carefully hidden behind a rock formation, and in fact I was. At least from that particular gibbering mouther. Within moments, a second cacophony of voices erupted from behind us, and before I knew it, I was overcome by the sound. I'm not sure what came over me in that moment, but I took off and ran away from the danger. Unfortunately, right towards the original mouther. Just as it finished its meal, I watched as a new set of yellow eyes surfaced on the body of the creature, and they instantly spotted me running right towards it. As I finally took back control of my movements, I looked on in horror as a chemical blob flung forth at me from one of its many mouths. Unfortunately, I was within spitting distance, pun intended, and was too fascinated to avert my gaze until it was too late. The glob hit the ground and exploded in a flash, leaving me blinded. Unable to see and unsure of which direction to move, I tried my best to regain my sight in the moment. When I finally opened my eyes, I looked on in horror as I stared into the maw of razor-sharp teeth just inches from my face. As I turned to run, I found that my boots were now mired in the stone floor, which was now the consistency of wet dough. I was powerless and fearing for my life as I waited for the mouths to engulf me. It was at this moment that the barbarian leaped to my rescue, throwing me out of my boots and back onto the hard stone floor. Having taken my place, the mouths tore down on his flesh and pushed hard against him in an attempt to roll over him. Through a sheer force of will and strength, the barbarian threw the creature back and effortlessly slashed through it with his mighty axe. As the mouther came forth again for a second bite, a flash of fire spewed forth from the entrance of the tunnel, illuminating our wizard companion who had come to our rescue. The creature momentarily retreated as the flames enveloped its outer lair, but it did not stop it for long. Once again, it pushed forward, though this time we were prepared, and both the barbarian and I had moved to make our escape. This story is just one example of the many close encounters that I've had while compiling the entries for my award-winning book, Volo's Guide to Monsters. Although this monster did not make it into the final version of the book, having been cut during the editing process, I feel it is still worth sharing this information in one form or another. If my experience counts for anything, heed my advice. If you ever find yourselves in the depths of a dungeon and begin to hear a distant, incoherent chattering, you'd be wise to turn tail and run. If you're not careful, it could be you who is the unidentifiable meal of the gibbering mouther. If you know an adventurer that could benefit from this information, please distribute this message accordingly. You never know, it could save someone's life. And if you'd like to hear more of my stories, please be sure to subscribe for the next monster entry. Until next time, cheers.